On the day every orphan received a weapon or a beast, my familiar appeared beneath me, and the floor cracked because the useless wooden chair refused to move. Then a voice asked why I wanted power when, in my first life, I had once obeyed an order that left an entire district to die. I did not answer. Around me, the other 16-year-olds in the Hall of Calling shouted as bright creatures sprang from circles painted on the stone. A bronze fox climbed onto a boy's shoulder. A girl caught a silver spear that fell out of the air. Someone near the back screamed with delight when a hawk made of blue fire opened its wings. I sat on 4 plain legs of dark wood. The chair had a straight back, a flat seat, and no decoration except a shallow scratch under my left hand. It looked as if it had been taken from a cheap kitchen. The summoning circle beneath it was split from edge to edge. When I tried to stand, the chair came with me for half a breath, stuck to the back of my legs, then dropped hard enough to crack the floor again. The examiner stared at his measuring crystal. He tapped it twice, frowned, and tapped it again. Familiar classification. Household object, he said. He sounded more puzzled than cruel. Movement, none. Attack, none. Defense, none. Magical reserve, unreadable. Cassian, please remove it from the circle. I would love to, I said. That earned a few nervous laughs. I gripped the chair beneath the seat and pulled. Nothing happened. 2 attendants joined me. The chair did not move. A broad boy with a stone ox familiar offered to help, and the 4 of us strained until our boots slipped. The chair remained where it had appeared. The voice returned. It did not echo through the hall. It spoke inside the part of my mind where another world's sirens still wailed. True ruler system awakened. Seat, common chair. Movement, none. Attack, none. Defense, none. Mandate, none. Burden, none accepted. First question. When every life cannot be saved, who decides which life matters? My hands went cold. I had been 7 years old in this world when the memories of my first life arrived. They had come during a fever, not as a clean story, but as smells, alarms, maps, and the pressure of a headset against an adult ear. By the time the fever broke, I remembered being a city emergency dispatcher during a flood. I remembered a supervisor ordering all available buses toward the financial center. I remembered the unregistered Riverside settlement blinking red on my screen. I had asked about it once. I had been told to follow priorities. I had followed them. Hours later, when the official roads were already underwater, I stole a maintenance van and drove back. I pulled 3 people from a roof before the current rolled the van. My last sight in that life had been a row of dark windows and hands waving from them. The order had not made the choice. I had. I grew up a second time in the Ash Ward, where no street appeared correctly on official maps. I learned to count doors, to notice blocked drains, and to keep a coil of rope beneath my bed. I repaired loose hinges whenever my thoughts became too loud. I never volunteered to lead anything. Now a divine voice had asked me the one question I could not answer, and several hundred people were waiting for me to move a chair. The examiner cleared his throat. We can finish the ceremony around him. Mark the object for later removal. Cassian, remain seated. I can stand. Then stand beside it. I did. The chair allowed me to rise, but when I stepped away, it slid after me with a scrape. The attendants jumped back. I took another step. It followed only far enough to touch the back of my knees, as if insisting that I sit whenever I stopped. Movement none, I muttered. It did move, the examiner said. I think it considers me part of the furniture. That earned a real laugh, including one from the examiner. I was grateful. Laughter was easier to endure than sympathy. The ceremony continued. By noon, every orphan had received an assignment based on the familiar they had summoned. Combat familiars went to guard schools, craft familiars went to licensed workshops, healing familiars went to temple clinics. When my turn came, the examiner wrote domestic service on my paper, hesitated, and added pending review. I folded the paper into my pocket. I had expected nothing grand. In the ash ward, a secure kitchen position was considered good fortune. The chair was embarrassing, but embarrassment had never killed anyone. Outside the hall, the sky above the Capitol shone with the pale gold web of the crown lattice. Lines of light ran between palace towers and the boundary pylons that protected the city from the white storms beyond the walls. They were brighter over the marble heights and almost invisible above the ash ward. I had spent years pretending not to notice that difference. The chair followed me down the front steps by striking the back of my legs at each step. It could not move on its own, according to the crystal, yet it refused to be left behind. I tried dragging it. The legs screamed against the stone. I tried carrying it. The weight shifted from that of ordinary wood to that of a building as soon as I turned away from the ash ward. So I walked home with both hands on its back, taking small, awkward steps while it scraped behind me. People looked. No one threw rotten fruit. No noble child challenged me to a duel. A fruit seller merely asked whether I had stolen a chair from the ceremony, and I told him the chair had stolen me. By the time I reached the eastern bridge, my arms were shaking. Then I saw the red marks. Every building on the far side of the canal had been painted with a diagonal stripe. The orphan house had one across its door. Nessa's bakery had one across its oven wall. The communal pump, the laundry yard, and the narrow clinic all carried the same fresh imperial red. I stopped so suddenly that the chair struck me behind the knees. I sat. Nessa stood outside her bakery with flour on her forearms and a demolition notice in her hand. She was a square woman with iron-gray hair and the calm expression of someone who had seen every kind of bad news and refused to give any of it the satisfaction of surprise. "You brought us a chair," she said. "It brought itself. What happened?" She handed me the notice. By decree of the Imperial Works Office, the northern half of the ash ward had been designated structurally unsustainable. Residents had 3 days to report for relocation. Able adults would receive work placements near the outer quarries. Children would be distributed among approved institutions. At the bottom, in smaller print, the decree authorized removal of the local crown pylon and transfer of its remaining crystal to the central lattice. I read it twice. My old habit was to look for exits. There were none in the words. "The pylon is failing," I said. "It has been failing for 12 years. If they remove it before the next white storm, half the ward will lose its barrier, which will prove that the ward was unsustainable. Government can be very efficient when it arranges the evidence in advance." Behind her, people carried bundles into the street. Some argued about carts. Others stared at the red marks in silence. The youngest children treated it as a festival until they noticed that the adults were not smiling. I remembered red blocks on a flood map. I remembered telling a caller that help was assigned according to priority. "Where are the inspectors?" I asked. "At the pylon. They brought guards." I stood. The chair scraped forward and hit my legs again. "That thing seems determined to make you think before you walk," Nessa said. "It chose the wrong owner." I took the notice and headed toward the pylon. The chair dragged behind me, heavy but possible, while I faced deeper into the ward. Nessa walked beside me. "What will you do?" she asked. "Ask them to delay removal." "They refused the council this morning." "Then I will ask what calculation proves the buildings cannot be repaired." "They refused to show us that too." "Then I will become extremely irritating." Nessa considered this. At last, a useful familiar. The local pylon stood in a courtyard between the bathhouse and an abandoned dye shop. Once it had been a white stone tower. Smoke and mineral dust had turned it gray. 3 Imperial technicians were detaching copper lines from its base while guards kept residents beyond a rope. The officer in charge saw the chair and looked offended by it. "The area is closed." "I need to see the structural order," I said.
"You need to obey the relocation notice." "Those are compatible tasks. Show me the order while I obey very slowly." He rested a hand on his sword. I was thin, unarmed, and accompanied by a baker. Even so, people behind the rope grew quiet. Authority dislikes an audience when it has nothing prepared to say. One of the technicians loosened a copper brace. The pylon gave a deep pulse. Gold light flickered overhead, and a hairline crack ran across the courtyard. I felt it through the chair before I heard it. The wood vibrated against my palms. In my mind, the system spoke. Unheard need detected. Area, ash ward. Immediate risk, lattice collapse. Available mandate, none. No authority to act. The message angered me. I do not need authority to warn them. Warn whom? Nessa asked. The crack widened. I had studied the pylon in secret for years because failing structures bothered me. Its supports were old but serviceable.
The danger came from the technicians removing the northern brace before releasing pressure in the buried lines. "Everyone away from the bathhouse wall," I shouted. "Now!" The officer stepped toward me. "Do not interfere." The pylon pulsed again. A section of roof tile lifted into the air. White light leaked from the ground. I pointed at the lowest valve. "Close that before you remove the brace." The nearest technician stared at me, then at the valve. The line was listed as empty. "The list is wrong." "On whose authority?" There it was again. The question that let everyone place responsibility somewhere else. "Mine," I said, though my mouth went dry. "If I am wrong, arrest me. If I am right and you continue, people die. Close it." The officer ordered the work to proceed. Nessa ducked beneath the rope. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Following you," she said. "Try not to make me regret it." The system answered at once. 1 willing voice received. Mandate 1.
Purpose declared. Keep the ash ward standing. Burden accepted. The safety of 1 follower. Gift awakened. Listening seat. I did not feel stronger. I heard more. Not words, needs. The pylon hummed with them. Pressure sought a path. The old bathhouse foundation needed weight removed from its eastern corner. Nessa's left knee needed her to stop running. A frightened technician needed someone else to make the decision he already knew was correct. The chair became light beneath my hands. I lifted it, carried it under the rope, and set it directly in front of the valve. Then I sat. The chair's legs struck the stone with a sound like a judge's hammer. The leaking light stopped spreading for 1 breath. The officer drew his sword. "Move." "I cannot," I said. "The chair has no movement. It is in the official record." Nessa laughed once, sharply. Several residents joined her. The technician by the brace made his choice. He dropped his tools, ran to the valve, and turned it. Pressure screamed through the copper lines. The pylon bent toward us. I heard every joint in the courtyard ask for support at once. "Clear the bathhouse wall," I shouted. "Bring timber to the northern brace. Open the laundry drain. Not the street drain, the laundry drain. It connects beneath the tower." People moved. Not because the system controlled them. Most did not know I had a system. They moved because they lived there, because the wall was falling toward their homes, and because someone had finally named tasks they could perform. Nessa seized the rope and pulled it down so the residents could pass. The guards looked to their officer. He told them to hold the line. None of them did. One caught a timber beam before it struck a child. Water burst from the laundry drain. White light faded from the crack. The pylon settled onto the braces with a groan that shook dust from every roof. The chair remained a chair.
I sat in it until my shaking stopped. The officer sheathed his sword, because arresting me in front of 200 witnesses would have required more courage than drawing it. He ordered the technicians to suspend removal pending a new inspection. It was not victory, it was a delay, and only because the pylon had nearly killed his own men. I had learned in 2 lives that delays could contain entire futures. At sunset, the system spoke again. First burden upheld, mandate retained, seat condition improved, movement none, attack none, defense none, listening range 1 shared space. Next question. Will you accept a promise before you know its cost? No, I said aloud. Nessa placed a loaf of bread in my lap. Good. Only fools say yes to that. The demolition order still gave us 3 days. We spent the first night in the bakery because it had the largest table. The ward council had 7 members, all unnamed on the decree and all exhausted.
They argued over whether to appeal, hide, or leave before the roads filled. I listened until their words began repeating. We need 2 things, I said. Proof that the ward can be repaired, and enough time to repair it. We have neither, a council member said. Then we find people who were rejected for knowing how. There were many kinds of rejection in the capital. The imperial schools accepted students whose familiars fit a licensed office. A flame that burned at a steady temperature made a good smith. A flame that leaped between objects without consuming them made paperwork nervous. Mira had the second kind of talent. I found her the next morning outside the inscription school, selling copied lesson notes she was no longer allowed to attend. Her familiar was a spool of copper thread that divided itself whenever she pulled it. Imperial runes were built around a single source, feeding a single authorized receiver. Mira's thread insisted on connecting everything to everything else. She watched me approach with the chair scraping behind me. I do not repair furniture, she said. Good, it resists improvement. I need someone to inspect the ash pylon. The office already condemned it. The office also removed a live brace under pressure. That interested her. She folded her lesson notes, pushed them into a satchel, and walked around the chair. What does it do? Prevents quick escapes. A useful property in a client. I showed her the demolition order. She read the small print first. By the time she looked up, anger had sharpened her face. They are not demolishing the ward because the pylon is failing, she said. They are letting the pylon fail because they want its heart crystal. Can you prove it? If you can get me inside. The listening seat had no key opening ability. Nessa had 3 cousins who cleaned government buildings, but involving them would risk their jobs. I went to the pylon courtyard and asked the guards for entry. They refused. I asked to retrieve my chair, which still stood where I had left it. They told me to take it and go. Mira carried a basket and wore a scarf over her hair. She walked beside me as if she were my tired older sister. No one inspected the basket because it contained dirty laundry on top. Your first act as a revolutionary is poor security practice, she whispered. I am not a revolutionary. Then your first act as a chair owner. Once I sat, the pylon's needs returned as a pattern of pressure and strain. Mira laid her copper thread along the base. It split into shining fibers and entered every crack. She closed her eyes. The main crystal is healthy, she said. Old, but healthy. The outer streets are dim because the palace draws almost all its output. Look here. She showed me a hidden mark beneath an imperial seal. The pylon was required to send 9 shares of every 10 toward the central lattice. The ash ward survived on what remained. Can we change it? Not legally. Technically, yes. Briefly. Then the imbalance alarm will bring half the works office down on us. Can we use it to prove the buildings are stable? Stability is not the standard in the decree. The Emperor can reclaim a pylon from any district judged to have insufficient strategic value. I had been searching for an error in the order. There was none. The cruelty was working as designed. Then we need strategic value, I said.
Mira studied me. In 2 days? Can your thread connect the pylon to every workshop in the ward? Yes, if I had enough copper, permission, and several months. We have scrap wire, people who prefer homes to quarries, and 2 days. That is not the same list. It is the list available. She smiled despite herself. What exactly are you offering me? I nearly said a place. That would have sounded kind and meant nothing. I looked at the chair, at the hidden mark, and at the bright imperial line stealing strength above us. A chance to prove shared runes work, I said. Your design, published where everyone can see it. No master takes your name off the result. You may leave whenever you choose. And if your district falls? Then my promise failed, not your work. She held out her copper spool. I will follow that project until the inspection, not you. The system spoke. 1 willing voice received. Mandate 2. Purpose aligned. Keep the Ash Ward standing. Condition: credit and freedom retained. Burden accepted. Mira heard nothing, but the copper thread flashed between her fingers. What did you do? She asked. Accepted the terms. The chair's shallow scratch became a thin silver line. We found Bren at a charity clinic near the southern wall.
He had been dismissed from the temple school because his familiar, a gray cloth wrapped around his forearm, could pull pain out of another body but could not destroy it. The pain entered him instead. Temple healers called that transfer, not healing. The patients called it a miracle until Bren collapsed beside them. When I arrived, he was pale and sweating after treating a mason's crushed hand. No, he said before I explained anything. That saves time. No to what? Whatever desperate plan brought a boy and a chair into my clinic. We need someone who understands how much strain a person can safely share. Less than desperate people will claim. That is why we need you. He examined the demolition notice while the gray cloth tightened around his arm like a worried snake. Bren had gentle eyes and the suspicious manner of a man whose kindness had often been treated as public property. If I help, he said, no one is ordered to take another person's injury. No one is praised into doing it either. Consent must be spoken, specific, and temporary. Agreed. You agreed quickly. In my experience, sensible safety rules do not improve with argument. And when speed matters? That was the dangerous question. I remembered the pylon leaning over the bathhouse and how easily my shouted instructions had become authority. Then anyone can refuse me, I said, even if refusal makes the plan fail. Especially then, Bren said. He followed us back to the ward. 1 willing voice received. Mandate 3. Condition: consent must remain specific. Burden accepted. Gift available. Common ground. Requirement: declare 1 shared task and its limits. We placed the chair in the laundry yard. Almost the entire ward gathered, not because they trusted me, but because relocation carts would arrive the next morning. I stood on the flat seat so people at the back could see me. The chair did not object, which was the closest it had come to being helpful on purpose. I cannot promise that we will win, I said. I can promise what we will attempt. We will connect the pylon to the ward, repair every dangerous structure we can reach, and record the result before the Imperial inspection. No one must join. Food and shelter will be shared whether you work or not. If you do join, you choose your task and you may stop. Someone shouted, "Who put you in charge?" No one. Nessa put me in a chair. Nessa raised her hand. He was already in it. The laughter loosened something in the yard. I explained Mira's plan. Instead of feeding the remaining pylon energy into 1 official line,
Her copper web would connect dozens of small loads. Kilns, pumps, lamps, and reinforcement runes would support one another. A pottery kiln could lend heat to the bakery at dawn. The laundry wheel could power a pump while the wash water drained.
No workshop would become strong, but the entire ward would stop wasting what little it had. People asked practical questions. Mira answered until her voice went rough. Bren marked safe work periods on a board and refused every request to double them. Nessa organized food without waiting for permission. Then people began to step forward. The system did not announce every voice. I was grateful. Instead, I felt small points of warmth gather in the chair. Each came with a direction, not obedience. Keep my children here. Save the workshop. Prove we are not waste. Let the old remain near their dead. Give us a choice. Some purposes contradicted others. A few wanted revenge against the palace. The system refused those voices because I did not accept that purpose. One man offered to follow if I guaranteed him a larger room after victory. The system remained silent. Nessa followed for the ward. Mira followed for the shared design. Bren followed for consent.
None followed because I was Cassian. That made their trust easier to bear and harder to misuse. When the last volunteer had chosen a task, I placed both hands on the chair's back. Our shared ground is the ash ward, I said. Our task is to keep it standing through tomorrow's inspection. The limit is this. The ground may strengthen work freely chosen, but it may not command a person or take more strength than that person offers. Common ground accepted. Mandate: 217 willing voices. Burden: 217 purposes heard. Gift awakened. The silver scratch spread through the wood like a root. Light did not explode from the sky. No heroic music played. A woman at the communal pump pulled its handle and blinked when water surged twice as high. A mason lifted a cracked lintel that had defeated 4 men the previous week. He did not become superhuman.
His balance became perfect for one crucial moment, because everyone holding the ropes felt the same shift of weight. Mira touched her copper thread to the pylon. Every workshop bell in the ash ward rang at once. We worked through the night. The common ground did not replace skill. It made cooperation precise. When one group ran short of nails, someone 3 streets away felt the need and sent a basket before being asked. When a roof team leaned too far, Bren sensed the strain through his cloth and called them down. I sat in the laundry yard, hearing hundreds of needs press at the edge of my mind. At first, I tried to answer all of them. East wall needs rope. The pump team needs another wrench. Someone check the orphan house chimney. The southern trench is filling too quickly. Within an hour, my voice failed. Within 2, my thoughts tangled. I sent timber where copper was needed and nearly pulled the team away from a stable roof toward one already finished. Myra crouched beside the chair. Copper light webbed her face.
"Stop speaking," she said. "The Dye Shop Foundation has 3 masons who know more than you. Listen, then let them decide. The system shows me the needs. A need is not an instruction." I hated how exactly she found the weakness. I closed my mouth. The network became clearer. I told each street what the others lacked, not what to do. People began answering one another without passing every choice through me. The pressure in my skull eased. Before dawn, Bren sat on the ground beside the chair. His gray cloth had darkened almost to black. "You are carrying pain again," I said. "Only what was offered." "From how many?" "Too many." "Then release it." "Into whom?" The question revealed a flaw in our beautiful network. We could distribute strength, but pain was not a weight that vanished when shared. Everyone was tired. Several workers had burns and strained joints. Bren had taken the worst so they could finish their tasks, and now he could barely breathe. I reached for the system. Can the common ground carry this? No right without willing voices. I woke the yard. I explained what Bren had done and what release would mean. I did not ask anyone to accept his pain. I asked who wanted to hear the cost. Hands rose. Bren named the injuries one by one. A little pain moved into many willing bodies. The ache of a cut divided among 20 palms. The throb of a twisted ankle shared across a row of seated workers. No one received enough to be harmed. Bren's breathing steadied. Shared burden fulfilled. New principle recorded. Power may be divided, but cost must also be seen. The chair gained its first carved mark, a simple open hand. At sunrise, the ash ward looked exhausted, untidy, and alive. Copper thread crossed the streets overhead. Fresh timber braced old walls. Water flowed through cleared drains. The pylon glowed brighter than it had in my lifetime, though we had not increased its output by a single measure. We had only stopped sending 9 shares away. The Imperial inspection arrived with relocation carts. The chief inspector walked through the ward holding a crystal slate. He tested the buildings, the drains, and the pylon. Each result contradicted the decree already written on his slate. People followed at a distance. No one threatened him. At last, he stood before my chair in the laundry yard. "This network is unlicensed," he said. "Is the ward structurally unsafe?" I asked. "That is not the only issue." "It is the issue named in the relocation order." "You altered Imperial infrastructure." "We prevented it from collapsing after your technicians mishandled it." "The pylon belongs to the Crown." Nessa spoke from behind him. "The cracks belong to us. Perhaps we can trade." The inspector's mouth tightened. He was not a monster. He was a man with a completed decision and evidence that refused to support it. "I cannot certify this," he said. "Then record what you measured and let someone else refuse the numbers." He looked at the people, at the stable needle of his slate, and at the relocation carts waiting empty by the bridge. Finally, he signed a temporary suspension. 30 days. The ward could remain while the works office reviewed the unauthorized modifications. Cheers rolled through the yard. The system spoke beneath them. First stage complete. Seat, listening chair. Mandate, 217. Burden upheld. The ash ward remains standing. New question. Do people follow because you are right, or do you believe you are right because people follow? I looked at the smiling faces and found that question more frightening than the demolition order. 30 days was not safety. It was time borrowed from an institution that charged interest. The first week taught me that saving a district was simpler than administering one. During the emergency, everyone had agreed on the problem. Afterward, the kiln owners wanted priority on pylon heat, the bathhouse wanted more water, and 3 streets claimed the same pile of salvaged brick. People came to my chair expecting judgments. When I refused, they accused me of hiding from responsibility. When I offered an answer, someone asked what law gave me the right. Both objections were fair. I kept the chair in the bakery courtyard where anyone could approach it. That sounded democratic until I discovered that anyone included drunks before sunrise, neighbors with arguments about chickens, and children who wanted the chair to settle racing disputes. "The chair says I won," Ivo informed another child one morning. He was 9, narrow as a broom handle, and permanently missing one shoe. "The chair has never said anything useful about racing," I told him. "It said I have one willing voice." "That is not how it works." "Then how does it work?" I opened my mouth and discovered that I could not explain it simply. Ivo folded his arms. "So the chair says I won." Nessa made him sweep flour for lying to an officer of furniture. By noon, the entire ward had begun calling me that. Mira solved the resource disputes by drawing the network on the bakery wall. Every workshop wrote what it could offer and what it needed. Copper tokens represented available pylon energy. No one received a permanent claim. At sunset, unused tokens returned to the common pool. "This is administration," I told her. "No," she said. "This is making selfishness legible. Administration comes later." Bren created consent cards for the clinic. Green meant a patient allowed his familiar to transfer pain. Yellow meant he could ask again after explaining the amount. Red meant no. He kept the red cards visible because people had a habit of treating a healer's offer as a command, even when the healer whispered. The system responded to these changes. My mandate rose when residents chose to join the shared network, but it fell whenever someone withdrew. The first time I felt a voice disappear, I panicked. It belonged to a carpenter who had supported the repair effort but wanted nothing to do with permanent councils. "Did I fail him?" I asked Bren. "Did you promise he could leave?" "Yes." "Then you succeeded." The chair became lighter. True withdrawal honored. Mandate released without penalty. Burden fulfilled. Freedom to leave preserved. That was when I understood the system was not measuring popularity. It measured the relationship between trust and responsibility. A person could dislike me, challenge me, and still add strength by freely supporting our shared purpose. Another could praise me all day and add nothing if he expected payment or feared punishment. Imperial officials hated this ambiguity. They visited every few days. One measured copper thickness. Another inspected bakery weights. A third announced that communal energy sharing violated exclusive workshop licenses. We answered each charge, changed every unsafe practice, and posted every notice on the wall. The inspections slowed us, but also made the network better. Mira began greeting each official with fresh paper and visible delight. Some stopped coming. On the 12th day, the palace offered me a position. The letter promised a room in the Marble Heights, training in familiar management, and recognition as a minor imperial servant. In exchange, I would bring the chair to the Central Research Office and dissolve the unauthorized council. The signature belonged to the Emperor's private secretary, but the wax bore Emperor Aldrin's crown. I read it aloud in the laundry yard. A few residents urged me to accept and negotiate from inside. Others called it a trap. I felt their purposes pressing through the chair, turning every word into weight. My first instinct was refusal. The same instinct warned me not to decide while people watched. "I will answer tomorrow," I said. That night, I walked the ward alone. The chair scraped behind me. Common ground let me feel where the copper web was strained, where a roof leaked, and where people worked late. It did not tell me what they thought of the offer. Listening was not mind-reading, and I was glad. At the orphan house, Ivo sat on the front step, repairing his missing shoe with twine. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "I have not decided." Adults say that when they want to leave without being called liars. Some adults also need time to decide. Will they paint the door red again? I looked at the faded stripe. We had scrubbed it until only a pink shadow remained. "If I go, the suspension remains for another 2 weeks," I said. "The council can continue. Mira knows the network better than I do." That was not what I asked. Children were very efficient judges. "Yes," I said, "they might." "Then why would you go?" "Because I wanted a warm room. Because official recognition might protect us. Because I was tired of waking with 200 needs tapping behind my eyes." because part of me had spent 9 years dreaming that one correct authority would finally tell me what to do. To learn how the palace works, I said. Evo pulled the twine tight. You already know, it sends red paint. The next morning, I declined the offer. I did not write that the palace was evil or that I would never negotiate. I wrote that dissolving the council would destroy the purpose for which people had given their mandate, so the chair and I could not accept. 3 days later, the central lattice increased its draw from the ash pylon. Mira felt it first.
Copper fibers snapped across the ward. Lamps burst. The communal pump slowed to a trickle. "They are taking the last share," she said. "If we resist directly, the lattice will classify us as a hostile break. It can burn out the pylon." "Can we store power?" "Not enough." "Can we use less?" "We already use less than the palace fountains." The monthly white storm was due in 4 days. Without the pylon, the pale dust carried by the storm would pass through walls, drain body heat, and leave people sleeping until they died. I sat in the chair and listened to the ward. The system presented no new gift. 200 willing voices were not a bag of magic I could spend. Their mandate amplified common action, and there was no useful common action if we had no energy. Then I felt the pottery kilns cooling, the bakery ovens, the bathhouse furnace. Hundreds of tiny sources of heat scattered across the common ground. "Mira, the pylon sends power out. Can it receive power?"
"From imperial-grade crystals." That was not my question. She followed the thought. "Everything carries a little familiar resonance, workshops most of all. But the sources are unstable and belong to different people. Forcing them into one line would make them fight." "What if they agreed?" "Magic does not care about meeting minutes." My chair warmed under my hands. "Gift available. Shared measure. Purpose required. Exchange offered capacity without erasing ownership. Cost required. Every contribution and every use must remain visible." I showed Mira the message by repeating it. Her expression changed from disbelief to the particular hunger she felt when reality admitted a design was possible. "We would need a second web," she said. "Not copper alone. Something that remembers who gave what." Bren unwound a length of gray cloth from his familiar. "Pain remembers. Perhaps thread can too." For 4 days, we built a different kind of lattice. Every household chose what it could offer during the storm. A baker offered the heat remaining after the last loaf. A laundress offered the motion of her wheel. A child with a candle familiar offered one flame for an hour and changed his mind twice. Both changes were recorded. Mira's dividing thread carried each contribution to the pylon without blending away its source. On the evening before the storm, we hung a board in the laundry yard. It listed every offered measure and every planned use. Names appeared only with permission. Nessa insisted her oven be listed as the bakery because she said bread had more than one owner. I sat and declared the purpose. For the duration of the white storm, we will share enough heat and familiar strength to maintain the ash barrier. No person will be drained below the amount they offered. Every use will remain visible. Any person may withdraw before the storm begins. Shared measure accepted. Mandate: 480 willing voices.
Seat advancing. The chair's back rose beneath my hands. Not dramatically. One moment it ended below my shoulder blades, the next it supported my shoulders. A second carved hand appeared beside the first, palm facing palm, without touching. Then the storm struck. White dust erased the capital beyond our roofs. The imperial lattice blazed above the marble heights, while the line to our pylon went dark. The emperor had cut us off completely. Our pylon lit from below. Warm gold spread through Mira's web. I felt each offering as a distinct pulse. Oven heat, turning wheels, stored motion, songs from voice familiars, even the gentle pressure of sleeping bodies choosing to share a little warmth. The contributions were individually tiny. Aligned by purpose, they became a barrier. The storm pushed. Windows rattled. Frost formed on interior walls. People gathered in communal rooms to reduce the space we had to heat. The chair rooted itself in the laundry yard.
I heard the barrier's needs and spoke them aloud. Mira adjusted the web. Bren monitored strain. No one fought a beast. No sword could have cut the white wind. We survived by keeping ovens steady and doors closed. Near midnight, the western edge failed. Cold flooded one street. Ivo ran into the yard, his lips blue. "The orphan house chimney fell," he said. "The little ones are still inside." I stood, and the chair struck the ground behind me. It would not move. "We need it at the orphan house," Mira said. "The common ground is strongest around the seat." I tried lifting it. The chair weighed more than the pylon. Movement? None. Carriage? Unavailable. Reason? Destination not held by common will. "The entire ward wants those children safe," I snapped. The system did not answer. Bren understood before I did. Wanting them safe is not the same as choosing who carries the cost. There was no time for a ward meeting. I climbed onto the pylon platform and shouted until faces appeared at windows and doors. "The western barrier is down! The chair can anchor it, but it cannot move unless people freely choose to carry it. The route is exposed. I will not order anyone." For one terrible second, no one stepped forward. That second belonged to every person who had ever been told a sacrifice was mandatory. Then Nessa tied a scarf over her mouth. Mira wound copper thread around her wrists. Bren tightened his gray cloth. The guard who had caught a timber beam on the first day came out of his house. More followed. 12 people placed their hands beneath the chair. Destination accepted by all bearers. Orphan house. Carriage available. The chair became lighter than wood. They lifted it with me sitting in it because leaving the seat broke the strongest part of common ground. I felt absurd and terrified as they carried me into the white storm like a minor king in a procession arranged by bad weather.
"Left at the pump," I called. "Low by the alley. The wind is strongest above the wall." The bearers decided how to move. When one stumbled, another took the weight. Bren absorbed a cut from flying slate, then demanded a replacement before continuing. At the orphan house, they set the chair in the doorway. Common ground expanded. The barrier curved around the building. Ivo led the youngest children out in a rope line. None were lost. By dawn, the storm had passed. Pale dust lay in drifts against our walls, but no red marks appeared on our dead because there were none. The central lattice recorded that the ash pylon had maintained a barrier while disconnected. By midday, copies of the impossible reading had reached every works office in the capital. By evening, people from other neglected wards were asking Mira for the design. The Palace Review arrived on the 30th day. It did not authorize our network. It declared the matter an imperial security concern and extended the suspension indefinitely while the Crown investigated. We celebrated anyway. 1 month after the chair appeared, I slept beside the laundry yard because it would not fit upstairs, woke before dawn to hear petitions, and forgot meals until Nessa found me. 480 voices strengthened common ground, yet I had never felt less certain that its strength belonged to me. The chair now carried 2 carved hands and a web of silver. It remained ugly and produced a splinter when a cabinetmaker offered to polish it. "It has taste," Nessa said. "It has hostility. Those are often confused in fine furniture." Our victory drew visitors. Some wanted the network, while others wanted me to solve every need they carried. After I spent a night reading petitions from 3 outer districts, Bren took the papers away. "People ask because they heard you helped once," he said.
"That does not make every request your burden." I knew he was right, though each refusal still looked like a red block on my old flood map. We created an open yard where rejected students could test inconvenient familiars against useful problems. We promised honest results, not secret greatness. A talent that made stones smell like rain proved useless for drains, but excellent for warning of weather. Shared measure let narrow abilities support an entire street when people consented to the task. Mira published every successful design, then rewrote the instructions whenever distant workshops copied them badly. The Emperor answered with licenses. No shared familiar network could operate without an imperial overseer. No pylon modification could cross district lines. No citizen could pledge magical support to an unrecognized authority. Each rule sounded reasonable alone. Together, they made our existence illegal. The first arrests occurred outside the Ash Ward. Workers in a riverside district had copied our pump design. Imperial guards seized their copper and detained the people who installed it. A delegation came to ask for protection. "If I accept," I told the council, "the palace will say we are expanding a rebellion." "If you refuse," Mira said, "the palace will learn it can isolate anyone who copies us." "They did choose the design," Bren said. "They did not choose Cassian." That distinction saved us from an easy mistake. We sent technical witnesses, legal records, and food for the detained families. We did not claim the district as part of my mandate. When its residents later formed their own council and voluntarily aligned with the purpose of keeping every district standing, the system accepted them. The common ground stretched across the canal. I felt it as a road made of choices. It did not cover every building. It touched only the workshops, homes, and public spaces whose people had agreed to the shared compact.
Between them lay gaps, including houses whose owners wanted nothing to do with us. The power flowed around those gaps without punishment. The chair's back grew taller, seat advanced. Common chair. Mandate, 1,900 willing voices. Range, connected communities. Gift strengthened. Shared measure. Warning, every connection carries needs in both directions. The warning proved literal. When a fire broke out across the canal, I woke with smoke in my mouth, though my room was clear. When our pylon failed for half an hour, their workshops felt the strain. We had not built a weapon, we had built vulnerability with a purpose. That was when Crown Princess Ilara came to the Ash Ward. She arrived without banners, wearing a gray traveling coat and accompanied by 2 guards who waited at the bridge. I recognized her because her face appeared on coins, although the coins gave her a softer nose. Nessa recognized her because one of the guards tried to inspect the bakery before she entered. Nessa threw him out, then charged the princess full price for tea. Ilara sat on an overturned flour bucket opposite my chair. She was 20, composed, and so tired that her careful posture looked painful. "My father believes you are building a rival crown lattice," she said. "We are keeping pumps running." "Those statements are not mutually exclusive." "Did he send you?" "No. If he knew I was here, your district would receive another inspection, and I would receive a locked door." "Then why come?" She placed a narrow book on the table. It contained copies of early crown laws, older than the Empire. The first kings of Avar had not powered the national barrier by taking fixed shares from every pylon. Each region offered strength in exchange for protection, and the crown recorded whether the exchange was fulfilled. "The crown was once reciprocal," Ilara said.
A ruler's authority grew when people renewed their consent. Over generations, renewal became ceremony. Ceremony became tax. My father did not create the present system, but he has driven it farther than any ruler before him. Why? Because he remembers the border fracture. Provinces stopped contributing. The national barrier failed. Local lords fought over the remaining pylons. He was a child, and he watched 3 cities freeze. He believes a forced unity is kinder than a voluntary collapse. I understood the shape of that fear. One disaster had become a law inside him, as the flood had become one inside me. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want the crown lattice reformed before it breaks. The central draw is damaging every outer pylon. Within 2 years, perhaps less, the palace will be bright and the country around it will be dark. If my father sees your network only as rebellion, he will destroy it. If you accept lawful recognition under my authority, I can protect it." "At what price?" "You would become an office of the crown. Your followers would register. I would approve expansion." The chair grew cold. No willing voice detected in proposed authority. Purpose conflict. Choice would become permission. I repeated the message. Ilara looked at the chair for a long moment. "Convenient." "Painfully inconvenient in my experience." "You expect the heir to the throne to accept a system only you can hear." "No, I expect you to judge what we do. The system does not make me right." "Then offer another arrangement." I had expected command or insult. Negotiation was harder. Mira joined us and read every page of Ilara's proposed charter. Bren added a clause requiring specific consent before any familiar strength could enter the network. Nessa crossed out a line that exempted royal property from energy accounting. "That line is standard," Ilara said. "So is stale bread," Nessa replied. "I do not serve it to guests." We worked until the candles burned low. The final compact did not place us beneath Ilara. It declared a temporary alliance for 3 purposes: protect connected communities, publish evidence of lattice damage, and prevent armed conflict. Either side could withdraw publicly. No secret order could alter the terms. Ilara signed first. "I follow this compact," she said, "until the crown can again protect without consuming its people. I do not swear to you, Cassian." One willing voice received. Mandate aligned across the royal line. New path detected. The crown remembers. The national lattice flashed overhead. For one heartbeat, every golden line above the ashward bent toward my wooden chair. Then the light snapped back to the palace. Ilara had gone pale. "My father felt that." The palace bells began to ring. Before dawn, Emperor Aldrin named me an enemy of imperial unity. The decree was posted at every bridge. It accused me of stealing crown energy, collecting unlawful oaths, corrupting the princess, and constructing a throne in preparation for rebellion. I examined the chair. It had a tall back now, but one leg still bore a stain from Nessa's kitchen. "The last charge seems ambitious," I said. "Give it time," Mira replied. The bridges closed before noon. Imperial guards allowed people to leave the ash ward, but not to enter. Food carts were turned away. Copper shipments were seized. The palace did not call it a blockade. The decree described it as a temporary boundary for public safety. Our alliance had failed its 3rd purpose within hours. Ilara wanted to return to the palace and challenge her father before the full court. I refused to let her go alone, which immediately exposed another limit of my authority. "You do not let me do things," she said softly. "We discussed this. The decree calls you corrupted. He may imprison you." "He may. It remains my decision." I gripped the chair. "If you are taken, the alliance loses its legal protection." Then say you need me for the compact. Do not disguise strategy as concern for my freedom. She was right, and the fact that she was walking toward danger did not make her less right. I need you here until we have copied the old laws, I said. After that, I ask you to stay because the palace is dangerous. I will stay until the copies are sent. Then I will decide again. The system remained silent. No praise, no reward. Consent was not an achievement when I merely stopped trying to take it. We had stored grain for white storms, not sieges. Nessa counted enough food for 9 days at ordinary portions. The connected Riverside district offered supplies, but the guards controlled the canal. Shared measure could pass familiar energy along our voluntary links. It could not pass flour. For the next week, every decision became a test of what our principles cost. We reduced meals by public agreement. We opened private storerooms only when their owners consented. When 2 merchants tried to sell bread at 10 times its price, people demanded confiscation. I wanted to approve it. Children were hungry while grain sat behind locked doors. Nessa stopped me. Offer them fair value and a place on the ration board, she said. They are using the blockade to profit. Yes, if you seize their grain because the crowd supports you, what exactly makes your mandate different from a decree? We negotiated. 1 merchant accepted. The other chose to leave through the imperial line with his grain and discovered the guards would seize it as contraband. He returned furious and sold it to the ward at the ordinary price. It was not a moral transformation, but the children ate. Across the bridges, our allies held silent markets. Farmers placed sacks at the edge of the boundary. Guards removed them. The next day, 5 times as many sacks appeared. Arrests began. Each arrest made the blockade harder to describe as public safety. Ilara recorded everything. Her royal seal still opened messenger channels even though the palace watched them. She sent copies of the old Crown Compact, the lattice readings, and the blockade orders to courts across Avar. Emperor Aldrin sent one answer. Return to the palace, it told her. The realm cannot survive 2 sources of loyalty. Ilara read it at the bakery table. That is the heart of it. He thinks people have only one loyalty to give, Bren said. He thinks divided loyalty caused the border fracture, she replied. Mira looked up from the network map. A bridge with one support is not united. It is badly designed. On the 8th night, someone cut the western copper line. The connected district vanished from common ground. A few minutes later, flames rose beyond the canal. Imperial troops were burning the riverside storehouses, claiming they contained weapons intended for us. Our people rushed toward the bridge. Some carried tools, some carried knives. The system filled with purposes I could not accept. Punish them, break the line, take the grain, make them fear us. Marshal Corven waited on the other side with 3 ranks of guards. I knew his name from the decree. He was a hard-faced man with a red cloak and a voice trained to cross battlefields. Disperse, he ordered. Any attempt to cross will be treated as armed rebellion. A stone flew from our crowd. It struck a shield. The guards lowered spears. I remembered flood alarms. I remembered choosing buses on a screen because numbers did not have faces. Now I had too many faces and no bus. I climbed onto the chair. Anyone who follows our compact, step back from the bridge, I shouted. The first row looked at the burning storehouses. No one moved. I could have invoked common ground. I could have amplified the motion of those who obeyed and made the crowd flow backward.
The gift waited, technically available. My purpose would be preventing bloodshed. A good purpose. Using authority without willing action will convert mandate to force. Force offers immediate compliance. Cost? Willing voices become subjects until released. I felt how easy it would be. Hundreds of points of trust could become chains for 1 minute. No one would die on the bridge. The system did not forbid tyranny. It merely named the price honestly. "No," I whispered. I stepped down from the chair and walked alone onto the bridge. "Cassian," Ilara called, "I am not ordering anyone to follow." That was not bravery. It was the only decision that did not turn people into tools. My knees shook so badly the chair tapped them from behind until I sat. I dragged it to the center line, stood again, and left it between the two crowds. Marshal Corvin watched me approach. "Return to your side." "Your soldiers burned food during a blockade." "The storehouses held material support for an outlaw." "They held winter grain. Let Ilara inspect them. If there are weapons, we withdraw. If there are not, open the bridge to food." "The princess is acting under unlawful influence." "Then you inspect them. Publish what you find under your own seal." The fire cracked behind him. One wall collapsed, spilling grain instead of weapons across the street. Soldiers turned their heads. "The decree does not require you to burn food," I said. "The decree requires me to prevent material aid." "A rule can place a decision in your hand. It cannot close your fingers." His face changed slightly. Perhaps he had his own flood map. Behind me, Nessa called for buckets. People began forming a line from the canal. They did not cross the military boundary. They passed filled buckets to the center and set them beside my chair. For a while, nothing happened. Then one Imperial guard laid down his spear, picked up a bucket, and carried it to the flames. Marshal Corvin could have arrested him. Instead, he took the next bucket. Both crowds moved. We fought the fire together while the chair sat in the middle of the bridge and did absolutely nothing visible. By dawn, 2 storehouses survived. Corvin opened the boundary to food for children and the sick. He did not join our compact. He did not need to. A moral choice was not valuable only when it increased my mandate. Ilara returned to the palace that afternoon. She had finished the copies. Her father had offered a formal hearing, and refusing would allow him to claim she had been kidnapped. She stood beside the chair with a travel bag and no guards. "I cannot promise I will come back," she said. "I know." "You want to tell me not to go?" "Yes." "Thank you for saying what you want instead of making it a law." She crossed the bridge. Corvin escorted her through the Imperial line. 3 days later, the palace announced that the princess had been placed in protective seclusion for magical examination. The blockade tightened again. I blamed myself with impressive efficiency. I had accepted Ilara's alliance. I had let her return. I had failed to predict her father's response. By the end of the day, I had converted every one of her choices into evidence against mine. Bren listened until I ran out of accusations. "Do you believe Ilara is responsible for her decisions?" he asked. "Of course." "Only when they succeed?" I stared at him. "Respecting choice means allowing people to own mistakes too," he said. "You cannot carry everyone without also making them small." The chair's burden eased, though the danger did not. We endured the blockade for 23 days. Then it ended because the rest of the capital became inconvenient. Shared networks had appeared in 6 districts. None were identical. One coordinated rooftop gardens. Another balanced clinic supplies. A third connected small metalworkers who had been excluded from palace contracts. Closing every participating street would have stopped half the city's work. More importantly, the outer provinces had read Ilara's documents. Local councils began measuring how much power their pylons sent to the capital. The numbers spread faster than decrees could suppress them. Emperor Aldrin reopened the bridges and declared the containment successful. He had prevented unrest, his announcement said. He did not explain what had changed. We knew. The Ash Ward was no longer alone enough to erase. The following months did not become peaceful, they became larger. I traveled because people asked me to witness local compacts, not because the chair gave me territory. Each journey began with a question to the bearers: where were we going, why, and what risk did they accept? If their answers differed too much, the chair became impossibly heavy. More than once, we unpacked it in the middle of a road and argued until sunset. The chair developed arms carved with open hands. Its back rose above my head. Children called it a throne. I refused the word. A chair becomes a throne when people carry it, Nessa said. People carry sacks of turnips. Then be grateful they chose the chair. Many communities refused me. One village used shared measure for a flood barrier, but rejected every political clause, and the system released its mandate when the water fell. Its barriers still stood. That was enough. A true ruler's system sometimes created only one useful hour in which people chose the same direction. Mira built public relay frames so distant communities could connect without sending decisions through my chair. Bren taught clinics to share strain and to treat refusal as a healing skill. Nessa stayed in the ash ward, sending bread and increasingly large reminders that I should eat. Ivo found his second shoe, lost both a week later, and called it material equality. Such ordinary foolishness kept us from becoming symbols even to ourselves. The emperor changed tactics. Loyal districts received roofs, roads, and better pylon shares. When my supporters called it bribery, Mira reminded them that the roofs were still real. Aldrin also published selected accounts and heard local petitions. His concessions protected his control, but they proved control could be challenged. Our conflict became a contest between two promises. Aldrin offered safety without uncertainty if everyone obeyed one plan. I promised only visible costs, voluntary strength, and the right to withdraw. His offer remained attractive to frightened people, and I refused to call their fear ignorance. We tested our network through floods, fires, and white storms. We lost buildings and corrected bad decisions. One council offered heat it did not possess. Its neighbors covered the shortage, then suspended its relay until the accounts were repaired. The system rewarded responsibility after error, not perfection. Mandate reached tens of thousands. Listening Seat began routing needs through replaceable local voices instead of flooding my mind. With that change came another temptation. Seat advanced, civic throne. Range, all connected compacts. Gift available, directive. Effect, align every willing action toward one declared result. Cost, uncertainty belongs to the seat. Failure burden belongs to the ruler alone. It sounded noble. I could take responsibility and make everyone more effective. During emergencies, directive might save lives. Mira read the message over my shoulder after I wrote it down. "You want it," she said. "Of course I want it." "Because it is useful?" "Because when things go wrong, no one else would have to carry the blame." That is not kindness. That is control wearing a martyr's coat. I did not unlock directive. Instead, we amended the compact so emergency coordinators had narrow, temporary authority chosen before each known risk. They could act quickly, and their decisions would be reviewed afterward. It was slower than magic and more durable than my certainty. The system changed the offered gift. Gift awakened. Concord. Effect. Willing actions remain independent but share timing, awareness, and useful strength. No single result imposed. The civic throne opened like a tree in spring. Silver lines spread across its back, forming a map that changed as compacts joined or left. The seat widened enough to be impressive and uncomfortable enough to discourage lounging. 1 year after my familiar appeared, I returned to the Hall of Calling. The cracked summoning circle had been repaired. A new group of orphans waited for their familiars.
The examiner who had measured my chair stood beside the same crystal, now careful not to tap it. "You are legally prohibited from recruiting here," he whispered. "I am here because Ivo receives his familiar today. He is not old enough. He insists the orphan house lost his birth record." "Did it?" Nessa says records are like shoes around him. Ivo was sent back to the benches when the true date was found. He considered this government oppression. I sat in the civic throne at the edge of the hall while the ceremonies continued. Spears appeared. Animals appeared. A girl summoned a clay cup with a crack down its side. The room went silent. She looked at me. I knew what everyone expected. The king of useless familiars would declare her cup secretly magnificent. I did not know if it was. "What does it need?" I asked. The girl held the cup to her ear. "Water." "Then begin there." The cup filled itself one drop at a time. I left before anyone could turn the moment into a doctrine. Outside, the crown lattice had changed. The palace lines were dimmer because hundreds of districts now retained voluntary shares. The national barrier still held. In some regions, it held better than before. That fact was destroying Emperor Aldrin's oldest argument. It was also destroying the lattice he controlled. Ilara had spent almost a year in the palace. We received messages through servants and relay workers. She was not locked in a cell. She attended formal duties, smiled at ceremonies, and copied records at night. Her father offered to restore her succession rights if she denounced our compact. She refused without making the refusal public, because a public break would have given him cause to arrest every official who helped her. At the end of the year, her final message arrived inside an energy account. The central crown crystal was cracking. For generations, it had been trained to receive compulsory flows. Our voluntary network caused power to shift according to active consent. The old crystal responded by pulling harder whenever a region withdrew, which damaged the pylons and the crystal itself. Aldrin planned to solve the problem with an ancient command called the Unity Decree. The decree would seize every familiar reserve in a VAR for one full day and force it through the palace. The surge might restore the crown crystal. It would certainly leave local barriers, clinics, and workshops powerless. A white storm, larger than any in living memory, was approaching from the north. The Unity Decree would begin when the storm reached the border. At the bottom of the account, Ilara had written one line. He believes he is choosing which districts must suffer so the nation survives. I read the sentence until the room around me became an emergency station in another life. Red blocks, limited vehicles, a voice saying, "Follow priorities." Emperor Aldrin and I had reached the same question from opposite directions. When every life could not be saved, who decided which life mattered? For years, I had answered that question by refusing to sit at the table where it was asked. Aldrin had answered it by making the table so high that no one else could reach it. Neither answer would stop the storm. I called every connected compact into session. Not to ask for loyalty. I gave them Ilara's evidence, Mira's calculations, and the expected time of the Unity Decree. Each community received 3 choices. It could disconnect and preserve its familiar reserves for local survival. It could contribute to an attempt to stabilize the national lattice. Or it could wait for the Emperor's plan. "You are offering them the right to abandon other districts," Mira said after the messages went out. "Yes." "Some will use it." "Yes." "You hate this." "More than I can explain." The first answers arrived before sunset. 2 mountain towns disconnected. A farming basin chose to protect its own floodwalls. 3 coastal wards supported the national attempt only if no energy passed through the palace. The Ash Ward voted to contribute everything above household survival levels. There was no unity. There was an argument the size of a country. Then the arguments began producing a plan. Communities compared risks. The mountain towns discovered their barriers could shelter nearby villages and offered space instead of power. The farming basin offered grain stores and asked neighboring pylons to cover its eastern wall. Cities with strong healers accepted patients from districts that chose to spend more energy on the storm barrier. No central mind could have designed the exchanges as quickly because no central mind knew every local capacity. Concord carried timing and needs across the network. People remained stubborn, frightened, generous, short-sighted, and informed. By morning, we had a national defense plan with gaps. The largest gap was the palace. Every major lattice line still passed through its crown crystal. Aldrin could block our exchanges or trigger the decree before we were ready. "We need access to the central chamber," Mira said. "Alara may be able to open it," Bren replied, "if she is still free enough to act." Everyone looked at me. A year earlier, I would have waited for someone older or more official to decide. "We go to the palace," I said. "Not to take it. We go to prevent the unity decree and connect the voluntary plan. Anyone who comes must accept that the Imperial Guard may treat us as rebels. No weapons. Engineers, healers, witnesses, and bearers only." The system stirred. Purpose declared. Preserve every possible community through the coming storm. Competing purpose detected. Remove the Emperor. Clarification required. I could not honestly deny the second purpose. Aldrin would keep trying to destroy the network, yet marching on a palace while pretending not to challenge its ruler was the kind of lie that turned principles into decorations. "We will remove his ability to force the unity decree," I said. "If that ends his rule, the consequence will be public. I will not claim his office through force." Purpose accepted. Final path available. Requirement: the seat must reach the crown before the crown reaches every familiar. No gift granted. The lack of a gift felt strangely reassuring. The system had brought us as far as power could. The rest required people. Our procession left the Ash Ward at dawn. The civic throne rode on long wooden poles carried by volunteers. I sat only when the network needed listening seat. The rest of the time I walked beside it, partly from humility, and partly because being carried through familiar streets made me ill. No army followed. Thousands of residents came anyway. They carried account books, tools, medical cloth, food, and copies of the original Crown Compact. At each bridge, more joined or watched. Some cheered, others closed their shutters. No one was compelled to make history visible from a window. Imperial guards blocked the avenue below the marble heights. Marshal Corvin stood before them in his red cloak. "The Emperor has declared this gathering an armed insurrection," he said. Mira looked at the tools around us. He must have suffered a violent encounter with a wrench. Corvin did not smile. "If you proceed, I am ordered to disperse you by force." "Will you?" I asked. He looked past me. The crowd stretched through the lower avenue, but it was the storm clouds beyond the city wall that held his attention. White rolled beneath them like a second horizon. "The unity decree is lawful," he said. "So was the blockade." "I ended that blockade when its execution exceeded necessity." "You opened one bridge. The decree remained." His jaw tightened. I did not ask him to follow me. I placed Alara's account on the front of the throne and invited him to read it. He read the figures once, then called an Imperial Lattice officer from his ranks to verify them. The officer did. "If we allow you through, and you fail," Corvin said, "the Emperor's plan may be the only defense left. Then keep your soldiers at the Crown Chamber. If our network cannot show a stable path before the storm arrives, choose again." "You would accept the unity decree?" "No, but your choice remains yours." He studied me with open dislike. "You make command sound like cowardice." Command is sometimes necessary. Pretending necessity makes the commander innocent is cowardice. He turned toward his troops. "Open the avenue," he ordered. "Escort the engineers to the palace. Any person who loots, threatens a resident, or leaves the declared route will be arrested. That includes both crowds." The guards divided. No cheer followed.
People understood that Corvin had not changed sides. He had chosen a narrower duty. It was enough. The Marble Heights had wide streets designed for parades and no drains designed for poor weather. Our procession passed fountains bright with stolen pylon light. Palace residents watched from balconies. I saw fear on their faces and realized many expected us to punish them for having warm homes. The system offered their needs to listening seat. Safety, clarity, a way not to become enemies by accident. "The common ground protects every person along our route," I declared. "Participation is not required. No home is part of our compact unless its residents choose it." The silver map on the throne grew around dark spaces without consuming them. At the palace gate, Ilara waited. She wore formal white, and 2 guards stood behind her. For a moment, I thought Aldrin had sent her to order us back. Then the guards removed their imperial badges and placed them on the ground.
"My examination found no magical influence," Ilara said loudly. "My father rejected the result. I have therefore examined myself out of protective seclusion." "Is that legal?" I asked. "Not remotely. Nessa would have approved." Ilara had opened the service gate, but the central chamber lay beneath the throne room. She led Mira, Bren, Corvin, and me through passages filled with officials who pressed themselves against the walls. The volunteer bearers carried the civic throne. Each doorway required a new agreement about destination. Imperial architecture contained too many stairs and not one practical ramp. "If we survive," Mira gasped beneath one pole, "your first royal decree should concern accessible buildings." "I am not issuing royal decrees." "Then your first aggressive furniture suggestion." We reached the throne room before the storm touched the northern border. Emperor Aldrin sat beneath the crown crystal. I had seen his face on statues. Broad brow, level eyes, hands resting calmly on the arms of a golden throne. The living man looked older and smaller, but his attention filled the room. Pale cracks shone in the enormous crystal suspended above him. Thousands of lattice lines entered it through the walls. No courtiers remained. Aldrin had sent everyone away except a ring of crown technicians. His gaze moved from Ilara to Corvin to my wooden throne. "You bring an enemy to the heart of the nation," he told his daughter. "I bring the nation to the part you claimed was its heart," she replied. "The streets outside are not the nation. They are a crowd." "The accounts represent 9 provinces and hundreds of local compacts." "Compacts that dissolve when frightened people change their minds." "Yes," I said. "That is what makes them choices." Aldrin looked at me directly. I felt the trained weight of a man obeyed for longer than I had been alive.
"You have never watched voluntary promises fail by the thousands," he said. "I have watched orders fail people who had no voice in them. And from that wound you built a creed. Do you think you are the first ruler to call his fear compassion?" The words struck because they were true enough to enter. I had built rules around my worst memory. I had nearly used mandate as force on the bridge. I liked being needed more than I admitted. If the system had rewarded praise instead of consent, I might already have become what he feared. "No," I said. "That is why the network can refuse me. Can the crown refuse you?" The crystal cracked above us. Aldrin did not flinch. "The crown has no will. It is an instrument." "The oldest compact says otherwise," Ilara said. "It records exchange. It recognizes fulfilled protection." Poetry written before the border fracture. Mira opened her instruments beside the central conduit. "The crystal cannot survive the unity decree." The first surge may fuse it, the second will split it. My technicians disagree. The technicians kept their eyes lowered. Do they? Mira asked. One of them whispered, the risk is acceptable compared with total barrier failure. There it was again. Acceptable to whom? I showed Aldrin the voluntary defense plan. He read faster than I expected. He understood the exchanges, saw the gaps, and pointed to them without hesitation. The northern line is underpowered. The mountain shelters will receive evacuees, I said. The western clinics cannot support that transfer. Bren answered. Patients have already begun moving south. And these 3 districts contribute nothing. They chose local defense, while others carry the national cost. You call that justice? No, I call it visible. After the storm, everyone will know who gave, who did not, and why. They can negotiate the next compact with truth. There will be no next compact if your gaps kill them.
Your plan creates gaps everywhere except the capital. My plan saves the structure from which we can rebuild. Your structure has names outside it. For one moment, I saw exhaustion in him rather than authority. He had spent a lifetime holding a single support beneath a bridge and could not imagine setting it down without crushing everyone. Let the network connect through the crown, I said. Do not transfer control. Open the conduits and let every contribution retain its source. You can watch the result. If it fails before the storm crosses the border, we revise the plan. And if it succeeds, I become ceremonial permission for your rule. I have not claimed rule. That is the most dangerous claim a rival can make. You gather loyalty while pretending to reject its consequence. At least I name myself emperor. He rose from the golden throne. You asked who decides which life matters, he said. The answer is the person willing to be hated after deciding. Then he placed his hand on the crown seal and began the unity decree early. Every familiar in Avar screamed. The sound did not enter through my ears. It tore across common ground. Mira's copper spool unraveled. Bren's cloth went rigid. The volunteer bearers collapsed as strength rushed out of their bodies toward the palace. Outside, fountains erupted into columns of gold. The crown crystal blazed. Lines stabbed through the silver map on my throne, trying to turn every willing connection into a channel of forced power. Mandate conversion in progress. Willing voices cannot be retained under compulsion. Release them or convert them to subjects. If I released them, the network would vanish at the moment the country needed it most. If I converted them, their strength would remain available to me. I could oppose Aldrin with an equal command. Force answered force. 2 rulers could divide the same helpless nation and call the struggle salvation. I thought of the carpenter who withdrew after our first repair. I thought of the child who changed his offered candle flame twice. I thought of Ilara correcting me when I tried to keep her safe by making her decision mine. Release every voice, I said. Mandate fell to none. The civic throne became dead wood. Common ground vanished. The needs of the country disappeared from my mind. After a year of constant presence, the silence was so complete I almost fell. Aldrin stared at me. You surrendered. No, I stopped holding what you were trying to steal. The crown crystal took the full unity surge. A crack split its center. Golden fragments rained onto the throne room, stopping in the air only because the technicians spent their remaining strength to hold them. The white storm crossed the northern border. Without mandate, I could not feel it. A palace signal gong announced the first barrier loss, then a second, then dozens. Ilara crawled to the royal communication seal. The crown can still broadcast. It will broadcast the decree, Aldrin said.
Only while your hand remains on it, Corvin replied. The marshal stepped between the Emperor and the seal. Remove him, Aldrin ordered. The guards at the door did not move. He ordered them again. One lowered his eyes. Another opened the throne room doors to the witnesses outside. Aldrin had not become weak. He had become a man speaking where obedience was no longer automatic. Elara placed her palm on the communication seal. What do I tell them? Everyone looked at me again. I had no system, no mandate, and no answer guaranteed to work. That was the point at which I finally understood my familiar's first question. Tell them the truth, I said. The crown is breaking. The voluntary network is released. Every community owns its strength again. Give them the plan, including the gaps. Ask them to connect directly to one another if they choose. No pledge to me. No pledge to the palace.
One purpose only. Carry every person we can through the storm, and let no hidden decision erase the rest. Elara spoke into the seal. Her voice traveled across Avar. She named the failure. She named the risks. Mira gave the connection pattern. Bren explained safe limits. There was no command at the end. For several breaths, nothing happened. Then a single silver line appeared on the dead throne. Nessa's voice came through the crown seal, rough with distance. The Ash Ward chooses the common defense, she said. We follow the purpose. Cassian may sit down if he is nearby. He thinks poorly while standing. Another line appeared, then 10, then hundreds. Communities rejoined without passing through my authority. The mountain towns opened their shelters. The farming basin released power after its flood walls stabilized. The districts that had chosen local defense kept that choice, but offered routes, beds, and workers.
Palace households opened their warm halls to evacuees from the lower streets. Soldiers along the northern barrier used their strength to move people instead of feeding the decree. Corvin took off his red cloak and wrapped it around a shivering technician. Willing voices received. Mandate unheld. Purpose shared across the nation. Seat condition fulfilled. The throne beneath my hands changed. Dark wood flowed upward without losing its grain. The open hands carved into its arms multiplied across the back, not as identical symbols, but as marks of tools, loaves, wheels, cloth, books, and bare palms. The silver map expanded beyond the capital. It did not show borders, it showed connections chosen and withdrawn, bright paths surrounding honest gaps. Seat awakened, throne of the many. Attack, none. Movement, none. Right. Strengthen every willing person in the work that person has chosen. Limit. The throne may coordinate, never compel. Price. Every broken promise remains visible to the ruler and the ruled. Final question. Will you sit above the people or among their burdens? I sat. The throne touched the crown lattice. It did not pull strength toward me, it returned strength outward. Across Avar, familiar abilities rose according to their chosen use. A small flame became hot enough to warm a shelter. A mason felt the exact strain in a wall. Healers shared exhaustion without hiding it. Farmers moving wagons found their animals stepping in perfect time. Every increase belonged to a person, a task, and a visible cost. The national barrier did not become one shining wall. It became thousands of overlapping shelters. Where a pylon failed, people moved through corridors maintained by neighboring towns. Where the storm cut a line, local relays found another path. The defense bent, argued, and held. Above the golden throne, the cracked crown crystal descended. Aldrin reached for it.
The crystal passed through his fingers as if they were smoke. It stopped over me. Light formed words in the air, not from my system, but from the oldest law of Avar. Protection rendered. Consent renewed. Reciprocal crown restored. Office recognized. King Cassian. The throne room fell silent. No, I said. It was not a clever response, but it was sincere. I had not decided to fight for power. I had not asked the crown to choose me. I had spent a year insisting that recognition was not consent, and now an ancient crystal was attempting to make me king in the middle of a storm. The crown displayed another line. Recognition is not possession. Acceptance remains required. Mira began laughing. She was exhausted, bleeding from one hand, and entirely unable to stop. Even the crown has better consent rules than the palace, she said. Aldrin sank onto the step of his golden throne. He looked not defeated, but emptied. If you refuse, he said, the realm fractures. Perhaps, I replied. And if you accept, you prove you wanted this. That was the trap inside every suspicion. Any choice could be made to confirm it. I looked through the open doors. The people beyond them were not kneeling. They were carrying instruments, treating the fallen, passing messages, and arguing over barrier loads. No one had stopped to become scenery for my coronation. I will not accept permanent or hereditary rule, I said. I will serve as recognized king until the storm ends and the country can ratify a public compact. That compact must preserve withdrawal, local control, visible costs, and the right to remove me. If the people reject it, the crown will choose again or remain empty. The crystal waited. Ilara placed her hand on the throne of the many. I follow those terms until ratification. Mira did the same. I follow the published design, including the removal clause. Bren said, I follow only if emergency power expires when the emergency does.
Corvin looked toward Aldrin, then at the storm signals. I follow the defense of the population under those limits. Their voices did not matter more because they were named. Across the lattice, communities heard the terms and chose. The crown settled above my head without touching it. Temporary office accepted. King by renewed mandate. Burden. The nation as freely offered. That seems excessive, I whispered. You should have read the small print, Ilara said. For the next day, the storm left no time to consider kingship. The throne amplified millions of chosen acts but decided none of them. I reported needs, asked what communities could offer, and accepted no. Sometimes refusal cost us a building. Sometimes it forced us to find an answer that did not destroy the people giving it. We could not save everything. An evacuated village disappeared beneath ice, old pylons shattered, and Bren's network reached its declared limits. Yet no inhabited district was erased from a hidden calculation. People at risk helped choose evacuation, reinforcement, or retreat. The mountain shelters filled, the farming basin held, and the ash pylon burned out only after sending its last warmth to the orphan house. The white storm passed. Sunlight reached Avar through a barrier patched from countless unequal lights. The imperial system had saved structures by sacrificing people in silence. Ours had saved people by allowing some structures to be lost in full view. It was not painless. It was not pure. It was a choice we could answer for. Emperor Aldrin abdicated before a public hearing examined the blockade, the burned grain, and the unity decree. He was guarded, not executed or paraded in chains. I would not build a new compact around the pleasure of watching an old ruler suffer. At the hearing, he argued that his rule had preserved the nation long enough for our network to exist. He was partly right.
History rarely gave us opponents generous enough to be wrong about everything. Ratification took 3 months. Some regions preferred Ilara. Others wanted no king. Ilara replied that bloodline was the question we could no longer treat as an answer. Because the lattice still required a living seat, we limited that seat instead. The king could coordinate defense, publish needs, and amplify freely chosen tasks. He could not seize familiar strength, dissolve councils, hide accounts, or name an heir. Emergency authority expired automatically, and communities could withdraw mandate. Mira made the charter visible on every relay. Bren secured the right to refuse transfers of strength, pain, or risk. Ilara rebuilt the courts, and Corvin bound the guard to people and law rather than one body on one chair. I accepted, not because I desired power, but because refusing responsibility could make others carry it. The answer was not to avoid decisions.
It was to show their cost, hear those who paid it, choose within honest limits, and remain removable afterward. The crown recognized me again. This time the choice was mutual. My coronation took place in the Ash Ward laundry yard because the palace throne room was still under repair and because Nessa refused to close the bakery for travel. There was no golden carriage. The throne of the many still had no movement. 12 bearers carried it from my room, argued about the safest turn by the pump, and set it beneath the copper lines Mira had hung on our first night. The chair was unmistakably a throne now. Its back rose like a dark tree, its silver map shifted with the living network, and open hands covered its arms. Yet the old scratch remained beneath my left palm. So did the kitchen stain on one leg. Nessa placed the first loaf of the morning in my lap. "A crown does not exempt you from breakfast," she said. Ilara read the compact. Bren asked me to state my consent aloud.
Myra checked the relay twice during the ceremony and interrupted once because a western province had submitted a correction. Corvin stood without his red cloak. Evo finally wore 2 shoes. They did not match. When the crown light settled above me, no one was required to kneel. Some people did. Most remained standing. A group near the pump continued repairing a pipe because national renewal did not make water wait. 1 year and 3 months after summoning the most useless familiar in the Hall of Calling, I became king of Avar. My throne could not walk, strike, block a blade, or issue an irresistible command. It could make an entire people stronger, but only while they chose what their strength was for. Whenever someone withdrew, a silver line faded from the wood. Whenever I broke a promise, the mark remained where everyone could see it. Evo approached after the ceremony and placed a hand on the throne. "Does being king mean you can decide races now?" he asked. "No."
"Then the chair is still useless." "For racing disputes, completely." He considered this and nodded with satisfaction. That evening, after the crowds thinned, I sat alone for the first time since the storm. Not truly alone. The throne of the many carried the distant warmth of every active compact, each one a door that could close. I could hear urgent needs, but I no longer mistook hearing for ownership. The system spoke one final time. True ruler system complete. Highest level reached. Accountable service. Mandate freely renewed. Burden freely accepted. First question answered. When every life could not be saved, no ruler had the right to decide that some lives did not matter. A ruler's duty was to reveal the limits, listen first to those who would pay the cost, and make the necessary choice without pretending innocence. Then the ruler had to remain seated long enough to answer for it. I rested my hands on the arms of the throne. Across the ward, lamps brightened for the evening shift. Other lights answered in living agreement. The crown no longer resembled a chain around one palace, but a web held by countless hands. I had once believed leadership meant choosing who could be abandoned. My useless chair had taught me something harder. The true measure of a throne was how much power it returned to the people standing around it.